Elias Voss woke at 5 in the morning the way he always did. No alarm, no groaning, no slow drag back from sleep. His eyes opened and he was already sitting up, feet on the cold floor, hands on his knees, just like that, like a machine that had been switched on. He made coffee the same way every morning, 1 cup, black. He stood at the kitchen counter and drank it while looking out the window at the street. Nothing was happening on the street. A street light was on. A cat sat under it for a while, then left. Elias finished his coffee and put the cup in the sink. He was 54 years old. He had spent 26 of those years in other people's countries, in other people's wars, writing about things that most people would never see and did not want to. He had filed stories from Baghdad, from Kabul, from a flattened town in eastern Ukraine whose name he could not spell without checking his notes. He had crouched behind things. He had run across open ground. He had watched a man die in a ditch in a way he did not describe to anyone, not even himself, not anymore. Now he lived in a small house at the edge of a mid-sized city in Ohio. He had a backyard with a fence that needed fixing on the left side. He had a neighbor named Petra who was 26 and worked at a bakery and played music at a volume that suggested she believed walls did not exist. He had a car with a dented bumper. He had gotten the dent 11 months ago. Petra had done it. She had pulled into her driveway at an angle, the way she always did, and the corner of her car had caught his bumper with a sound like a single clap. She had come over immediately, still in her coat, talking before she had even reached him. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I do this thing where I pull in too fast and I always think I've got more room than I do, and my depth perception is honestly terrible and I will absolutely pay for it. Just tell me how much and I'll pay it. I'm so sorry." Elias had looked at the dent. It was the size of a fist. He had looked at Petra, who was standing with her arms slightly raised, like she was waiting to be told where to put them. "It's fine," he said. "It's really not fine, it's a dent." "It's fine," he said again, not unkindly, and he went back inside. He meant to get it fixed. He wrote it on the small notepad he kept on the kitchen counter, bumper. He looked at the word the next morning and then turned the page and wrote his grocery list on top of it. The weeks went by. He tried in those weeks to build something he could call a routine. He walked in the mornings after the coffee, down to the end of the street and back, sometimes farther. He read. He had boxes of books he had bought and never opened, and he was working through them now with the same dutiful steadiness with which he had once worked through press briefings, understanding roughly half of what was being said and filing the rest away as things he might need later. He did not write. He had a document on his laptop with the title notes that contained 4 sentences he had written in September and not touched since. He opened it sometimes and read the 4 sentences and closed it. He was not unhappy exactly. He was not happy either. He existed in a register that had no clean name. He was present in his days the way furniture is present in a room. He was there. He took up space. He served a function, probably. His neighbors on the right, an older couple, had waved at him over the fence twice. He had waved back both times. The husband had once walked over to ask if Elias had seen their recycling bin, which had blown away in the wind. Elias had not seen it. They had agreed this was a shame. The bin was never found. The conversation was the longest one Elias had with another person that week. At the bakery where Petra worked, he had once gone in to buy bread. She had been behind the counter and had waved with both hands and called him neighbor and given him an extra roll. He had said thank you and left. He thought about the extra roll later. He was not sure why. He was good at being alone. He had always been good at it. In the field you were rarely alone, but there was a kind of aloneness inside the noise that he had learned to carry with him, a quietness he could pull around himself like a coat. It had been useful once. In a kitchen in Ohio, he was less certain. One evening in November, a Tuesday, Elias sat at his kitchen table with his second cup of coffee. He allowed himself a second one now, a small concession to the fact that there was no longer any operational reason to limit his caffeine, and he realized something. He could not remember the last time he had been angry. Not at anything. Not at the woman in the supermarket who had stopped her cart in the exact middle of the aisle and then looked at her phone for 2 full minutes. Not at the news, which gave him ample material every morning. Not at Petra, whose music had been audible through his wall at midnight on a Thursday. Not at himself. He sat with this for a while. He was not proud of it. He knew that some people would consider it a kind of peace, a thing to be aspired to. He did not experience it as peace. He experienced it as the silence after a power outage, when you suddenly notice how many things in your house were producing sound you had stopped hearing. The house was quiet, but something was off. He searched himself. He went looking for it the way you look for something you suspect is gone, methodically, starting with the small things. He thought about the supermarket woman. He thought about the dented bumper sitting outside in the driveway, still unrepaired after 11 months. He thought about the article a former colleague had written, which had received an award that Elias felt privately should not have gone to that article. There was something, a small warmth, a faint pressure like a memory of heat from a fire that had burned out a long time ago. But not anger, not really. He put his coffee down and looked at the wall. He was 54 years old. He had crossed more borders than he could count on both hands. He had sat in rooms where men decided, with the same mild administrative tone they might use to rearrange a budget, that other men would die. He had sat across from a woman in a refugee camp who had not spoken in 3 weeks and watched her try to explain, with her hands, what had been done to her house. He had sent that story to his editor and gone to sleep in a hotel bed with clean sheets and an unopened minibar and a television. He had done this for 26 years. And somewhere in those 26 years, without his noticing, something had gone quiet inside him, not healed, not resolved, just quiet, the way a nerve goes quiet after a certain kind of damage. He did not feel sorry for himself. That impulse, too, had gone quiet. He got up, rinsed his cup, and looked out the window at the dented bumper sitting in the driveway under the glow of the streetlight. He stood there for a while. The cat was back under the streetlight. It looked up at nothing, then looked away. Elias went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to the street. A car passed. Petra's music was a faint pulse through the wall, some song he didn't know, with a bass line that came and went like a slow heartbeat. He was not angry about the music. He was not anything about the music. He closed his eyes. He thought about the 4 sentences on his laptop, sitting in a document called *notes*, and wondered if he would ever write a 5th. He thought about Mara, his daughter, who lived 2 states away and called on his birthday and Christmas and once, unexpectedly, on a Tuesday in March. A call which had lasted 4 minutes and covered the topics of her new apartment, the weather, and a television show she thought he might like. He had not watched the show. He had not told her this. He thought about the dent. He thought, I should get that fixed. He thought it with the same mild, uncommitted tone of a man who has already decided, without deciding, that he will not. Sleep came the way it always came, quickly and without ceremony, like a door closing quietly in an empty house. Outside, the streetlight stayed on. The bumper sat in the driveway, dented, unhurried, waiting for nothing. The coffee shop was called Harbor, which Elias found slightly irritating because there was no harbor within 200 miles. But it had a table in the far corner by a window that got the morning light at an angle that didn't hit his eyes, and the coffee was strong, and nobody talked to him there, which he considered the 3 essential qualities of a good workspace. He started going in December. He told himself he was going to work on the document called *notes. He brought his laptop and opened the document and read the 4 sentences and then looked out the window for a while. Sometimes he added a word. Once he added a sentence, read it back and deleted it. He ordered refills. He watched the street. It was, he admitted to himself, better than the kitchen. The coffee shop had its regulars. A woman with silver hair who graded papers with a red pen and sometimes muttered. Two men in their 30s who worked on laptops and occasionally leaned over to show each other their screens with the urgent energy of people who believed their work was changing something. A barista named Dom who had a small tattoo on his wrist and remembered what Elias ordered after the third visit without being asked. And then there was the man in the corner. He was there when Elias arrived and there when Elias left most mornings. He had the look of someone who had been handsome in a way that had always been easy, had never cost him a thing, and who had built an entire personality on that foundation and not noticed that the foundation had begun, very slowly, to shift under him. He was 40-something. His jacket was expensive. His phone was always in his hand or against his ear, and his voice was the kind of voice that filled a room the way water fills a container. Not because it was louder than other voices, but because it spread into every available space. Elias noticed him the way you notice weather, present, not interesting, a condition. His name, Elias gathered over several weeks of unavoidable listening, was Marcus. He was in real estate in some capacity. He had opinions on things he delivered with the tone of a man who had never once suspected he might be wrong. He was rude to Dom in the specific way that well-dressed people are sometimes rude to service workers, which is not shouting. It is something quieter and worse, a kind of bored expectation, an absence of acknowledgement that says you are furniture that brings me things. Elias did not like Marcus. This was the closest thing to a normal human feeling he had experienced in months. He sat with it carefully, the way you sit with something fragile. He did not act on it. He drank his coffee and looked out the window and let Marcus talk and carry on across the room. This was enough for a while. On a Thursday morning in January, Elias arrived before Marcus for the first time. He sat at his corner table and opened his laptop and ordered his coffee and settled in with the particular satisfaction of a man who has claimed his territory. He put his jacket over the back of the chair across from him. He began reading what he had written, which was still, more or less, 4 sentences. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later. He came in already on a phone call, already at full volume, already owning the space. He looked around the room. He walked to Elias' table. Without pausing his phone call, without making eye contact, without any acknowledgement that Elias or the jacket existed as anything requiring consideration, Marcus reached across, picked up Elias' jacket between 2 fingers like a man picking up something he had found on the ground, and dropped it on the floor. He pulled the chair out and sat down. He continued his phone call. Elias looked at his jacket on the floor, then at Marcus, then at his jacket again. The old thing happened. He felt it in his sternum, a familiar pressure, a heat moving upward. His hands went very still on the table. In the old days, in the years before Ohio, before the quiet kitchen, before the dented bumper, this was the moment before something. Not violence, but the thing that preceded words, the thing that turned ordinary conversation into a reckoning. He stayed still. And then something happened that he had not expected and could not explain. He looked at Marcus, really looked, the way he had once learned to look at people in rooms where he was trying to understand the situation before it got worse, and he saw it. Underneath the jacket and the phone call and the particular practiced rudeness, there was something else. A tightness around the eyes, a small repetitive gesture, the thumb moving against the side of the phone. A laugh that came out too fast, too loud, slightly ahead of whatever joke had been made. The laugh of a man performing ease rather than feeling it. Marcus was afraid of something. Elias did not know what. A deal going wrong, a marriage, a number in an account somewhere, something. He did not know the specifics and did not need them. He recognized the pattern the way you recognize the smell of rain before it arrives. The heat in his sternum cooled. Not because he had talked himself out of it. Not because he had decided to be the bigger man or counted to 10 or thought about consequences. It cooled the way a fire cools when the oxygen shifts. Just less, and then not there. He bent and picked up his jacket from the floor. He folded it over his arm. He took his laptop and his coffee and moved to the small table near the back that was in no one's preferred spot, where the light was worse and the chair was slightly uneven. Dom caught his eye from behind the counter, a look that said, "I saw that." Elias gave a small shake of his head. Dom went back to the espresso machine. Elias sat down and looked at his 4 sentences. He did not feel calm. He did not feel like a wise man who had risen above things. He felt like a man sitting at a bad table with an uneven chair who had not done what the situation seemed to call for and was not entirely sure why. He tried to find the anger again. It was there somewhere, a coal under ash. But every time he reached for it, that image came back, the thumb moving against the phone, the too fast laugh, the fear that was underneath the bluster like water under ice. He wrote a sentence, then another. Neither of them were good sentences, but they were new. He came back the next morning, and the morning after. Marcus was there both times. Once, Marcus's call ended and he sat for a moment in the silence of his own company, and his face did something Elias had not expected. It went tired. For a window of about 6 seconds, the performance went offline, and what was left was just a man sitting in a chair being tired. Then the phone buzzed and Marcus looked at it, and his face assembled itself back into what it usually was. 6 seconds. Elias looked away. It felt wrong to have seen it, like walking past an open door into a room you weren't meant to be in. He did not tell anyone about this. There was no one to tell. He walked home in the cold. The street was quiet. Petra's car was gone. She started early at the bakery. The bumper was still dented. He passed it without stopping, went inside, made his second cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. He thought about the jacket on the floor. He thought about the thumb on the phone. He felt something that wasn't anger and wasn't forgiveness and wasn't anything he had a word for. It sat in his chest without a name, not unpleasant, slightly uncomfortable, like a piece of furniture moved to a new place in a room. Still the same room, still the same furniture, but different somehow from where you were standing. He opened the notepad on the counter. He turned past the page where he had written *bumper 11 months ago. He wrote nothing. He sat there for a while. Outside, the wind moved through the gap in the broken fence on the left side of the yard. It made a sound. Not loud. Just a sound, a small, dull complaint, like something that had been waiting a long time to be noticed and had accepted without bitterness that it probably wouldn't be. Elias listened to it for a moment. Then he got up, put his cup in the sink, and went to sit with his 4 sentences again. Mara called on a Wednesday. Elias was in the backyard when his phone rang, standing in the dead January grass, looking at the broken section of fence. He had looked at it many times. He had priced the wood at the hardware store twice. The fence was still broken. He looked at her name on the screen for a moment before he answered. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said. They had one of those conversations that moves on the surface of things, careful and controlled, like two people sharing a narrow path above a long drop. She talked about her job, something with a marketing company in Portland, work that Elias understood only in the broadest outline. She mentioned a friend, a trip she was thinking about, a neighborhood restaurant that had recently opened. She asked if he was eating. He said yes. She said good. Then she said, "I was thinking we could have dinner." Not a question, not quite a statement. Something in between, the way Mara had always communicated the things she actually wanted, sideways, giving herself room to retreat if the answer was wrong. "Okay," he said. A pause. "In February, when I come through for work, just dinner." "Okay," he said again. Another pause. "Just to be clear," she said, I don't want to talk about anything. I just want to have dinner." Okay, Mara. She exhaled, and in that exhale he heard about 10 years of complicated feelings deflating very slightly. Okay, she said. Good, I'll send you the details. She hung up. He stood in the backyard and looked at the fence. Mara was 28. She had her mother's dark hair and her mother's jaw, that particular set of the jaw that meant she had made up her mind, and the conversation you were about to have was a formality. She had grown up in Chicago with her mother, Carol, who was now remarried to a man named Greg who had a boat, and who Elias had met exactly once and found perfectly acceptable in the way that a beige wall is perfectly acceptable. Elias and Carol had not divorced badly. They had divorced the way a fire burns out, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the long diminishing, the heat dropping and dropping until one day there was only warm ash and then not even that. He had been away too much. That was what they said to each other, both of them, as though it were a fact of whether rather than a choice he had made over and over again. Hundreds of small choices, each one rational, each one building the next, until the sum of them was a marriage that he had come home to one October and not recognized. Mara had been 16. She had not been angry with him in the way that teenagers are sometimes angry, loudly, dramatically, for effect. She had been angry in a quiet and permanent way that was worse. She had looked at him across rooms with a measuring expression, as though she was deciding something about him, and whatever she decided kept getting revised, kept not settling into anything final. He deserved that. He knew he deserved it, and the knowledge sat in him like an old injury that didn't prevent movement but made everything cost a little more. He had not been an absent father in the legal sense. He had called. He had visited. He had been present at the important events, graduation, her move to Portland, the one time she had called him at 2 in the morning because of something he still did not fully know the shape of, only that it was bad and that she had needed a voice she trusted and had called his. That call had meant more to him than he had been able to tell her. He was not good at telling people what things meant to him. The restaurant she chose was Italian, mid-priced, the kind of place that was warm in the right way, not romantic, not trying too hard, just competent and decent, with bread on the table before you asked, and enough ambient noise that silence between two people didn't sit like an accusation. Mara was already there when he arrived. She stood up when she saw him, and there was a half-second where neither of them knew whether to hug, and then they hugged briefly, the hug of two people who love each other and haven't practiced it enough. She looked good. She looked tired in the way that competent people who work hard always looked tired, the tiredness underneath the capability, the thing you saw only if you were looking. They ordered. They talked about the things she had mentioned on the phone, the job, the restaurant in her neighborhood, a friend who was getting married. He told her about the coffee shop. He did not mention Marcus. She told him about a book she was reading. He said he would look for it. The bread was good. He ate 3 pieces. Around the second glass of wine, she had wine. He had water. He had stopped drinking 2 years ago without drama or announcement, the same way he had stopped a lot of things. She looked at him and asked the question, "Why were you never angry at us?" He said, "I was angry." "Not at us." She turned her glass. "At me, at Mom. You were never angry at us. Everyone else's parents fought. Ours just stopped." He looked at the table. He thought about how to answer, whether to answer, what version of the truth was the right size for this restaurant with this bread, and this daughter who had called ahead to say she didn't want to talk about anything. He said, "It wasn't, I don't think it was good. The not being angry, I think something broke." She was quiet, watching him. "In the field," he said, then he stopped. He looked at the bread basket. He looked at his water glass. He said there was a roadside, outside Fallujah, 2005. She went very still. "I'm not going to describe it," he said. "I won't describe it, but after that, after I wrote the story and filed it and came back, I remember sitting on the bed in my hotel room and thinking that I should feel something. And I didn't. I felt like a room after the furniture's been taken out. And after that, for a long time, he looked for the right word. He did not find it. Everything else just felt small, he said. Not because it was, just because the scale was wrong. Mara looked at him. He said that wasn't fair to you, or your mother, it wasn't fair. The restaurant was full around them. Plates arrived. Someone laughed loudly 2 tables over, a good laugh, a real one. Somewhere a phone rang and was quickly silenced. Mara did not say it's okay. He was grateful for that. She did not forgive him in the way of the movies, full and sudden and final. She sat there, and she ate her pasta, and he ate his, and they were quiet together for a while in a way that was not comfortable exactly, but was not as painful as it could have been. After some time she said, "I called you once, at 2 in the morning. I know. You picked up in 1 ring." "Yes." She looked at him. "I always thought about that you picked up in 1 ring." She paused. "I don't know why I'm telling you that." He didn't say anything. He thought about the phone ringing in the dark and his hand on it before the first ring had finished, and the quality of her voice on the other end, and what it had meant to him, and that he had never told her. He said, "I know." He meant more than the words. She may have understood that. He hoped she had. They did not order dessert. It arrived anyway, a small complimentary plate, 2 little biscuits, some kind of almond situation. They left it untouched on the table between them. Later, when the check came, it was still there, uneaten, going slightly stale in the warm air. He paid, she let him. Outside on the sidewalk, the cold hit them and she pulled her coat tighter and he put his hands in his pockets and they said the things people say at the end of evenings. She had an early flight. She would text him. He should look for that book. He would. She hugged him again, longer this time. She walked to her car. He watched her go. He stood on the cold sidewalk for a moment after she turned the corner. Just stood. The street was ordinary around him. A traffic light cycled red to red without occasion. He began the walk back to his car. He thought about the hotel room in Fallujah, the clean sheets, the minibar. He thought about the scale being wrong and staying wrong for 20 years. He thought about a girl of 16 with her mother's jaw looking at him across a room and deciding something about him, revising it, never settling. He thought about a phone ringing once. He reached his car. He sat in the driver's seat without starting it. He looked at the street. He was not in pieces. He was not healed. He was a man sitting in a car in February, outside a restaurant, having had the most honest conversation of the year in a place with decent bread and 1 uneaten plate of almond biscuits. He started the car. He drove home through the quiet streets. The bumper was there when he pulled into the driveway, still dented, patient as ever, asking nothing. He went inside and made tea, though he did not usually make tea, and sat in the kitchen with it and did not turn on the television or open the laptop or do anything except sit there and let the evening settle around him the way dust settles in a room, slowly, without drama, into every surface it can find. March arrived and the cold did not leave with it. The trees on Elia Street were still bare. The sky was the color of old dishwater. He had added 11 sentences to the document since February. Some of them were even good, he thought, though he wasn't sure yet. He read them in the mornings before the coffee shop and moved words around, and sometimes he looked up and an hour had passed without his noticing, which felt like something. He had gotten a text from Mara. It said, "Looking for that book you mentioned. Can't remember the title, which one was it?" He had not mentioned a book. She had been the one who mentioned a book. He typed this back and she replied with a laughing face and then said, "Right. Mine is good. You'd like it. I'll send you a copy." He had not told her he would like it, but he thought he probably would. This exchange, which took 4 minutes and covered nothing of importance, sat with him the rest of that day in a way he found hard to describe. He thought about it while walking. He thought about it in the coffee shop, where Marcus was on a phone call about something that had apparently gone seriously wrong. his voice lower than usual, the expensive jacket looking somehow less expensive. Elias looked at him briefly. Still the thumb on the phone, still the tightness. Different flavor of it today. He looked away and went back to his sentences. He was almost asleep, on a Wednesday in mid-March, a few minutes before 2 in the morning when the noise started next door. Not music, something different. He lay still for a moment listening. A voice. Male. Then Petra's voice, shorter, tighter. Something breaking, not a crash, just a single flat sound, a small object meeting a hard surface at the wrong angle. Then quiet. Then the male voice again, longer this time, the particular rambling repetition of someone who had been drinking and was explaining something that got further from the point with every sentence. Elias sat up. He was not a man who inserted himself into things. He had watched things happen in his life and in the world, and had mostly written about them or stood to one side and let them occur. But there was something in the quality of Petra's voice in the gap between the man's sentences, brief, kept small on purpose, that moved him before he had decided to move. He put on his shoes and his coat over his pajama shirt and went out the back door into the yard. The night was cold and clear. The broken fence between their yards had a gap where 2 boards had come down in the fall and he had not replaced them. He went through the gap. The light in Petra's kitchen was on. Through the window he could see her standing at the far side of the room with her arms crossed and her face doing the work of staying very flat, very contained. The face people make when they are keeping something down that very much wants to come up. In the middle of the kitchen was a man. He was 30, maybe. Broad-shouldered, not tall. A face that was probably decent when it wasn't doing what it was doing now, which was somewhere between anger and panic with a layer of alcohol blurring the line between them. He was holding in his right hand a broken piece of something, a garden ornament. It looked like a small ceramic thing that had been shaped like a bird and was now shaped like nothing. Elias opened the back door. Petra looked at him. The man turned. For a moment they were all 3 in the kitchen under the overhead light, and nobody said anything. Petra, Elias said. He said only her name, not as a question. She nodded very small. She was all right, she meant, I'm all right. He wasn't sure she was all right, but she meant it. He looked at the man. The man looked back with the particular unfocused aggression of the drunk, the eyes moving slightly too slow, the chin slightly too elevated. Elias said, "What's your name?" The man blinked. This was not the question he had expected. Elias said it again, not louder, same tone. "What's your name?" "Derek," Petra said quietly from across the room. "Daniel," the man said at the same time. Elias looked at Petra. "Daniel," she said, and the way she said it, the quiet resignation in those 3 syllables, told him something about the shape of this situation, how long it had had its shape. "Daniel," Elias said. The man Daniel straightened slightly. The ceramic bird piece was still in his hand. He seemed to have forgotten about it. His thumb moved along the broken edge the way a person touches a worry stone, automatic, unconscious. "I don't know you," Daniel said. "No," Elias agreed. "You should go back to your house." "Probably," Elias said. He did not go back. He came a few steps further into the kitchen, not toward Daniel, not positioning himself between Daniel and Petra, just inside the room rather than the doorway. He moved the way you move around an animal you are not trying to startle. He pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down in it. Daniel stared at him. "You can sit down too," Elias said, "if you want." "I don't want to sit down." "Okay." Silence. Daniel's jaw worked. The broken ceramic thing, the thumb on the edge of it. Elias watched and did not look away and did not push anything into the silence. He had learned, a long time ago, in rooms more dangerous than this, that silence was not a problem to be solved. People who were frightened or drunk or both needed the silence to run down, like a spring that had been wound too tight. You did not help them by filling it. You waited. You stayed in the room. You made the room feel safe enough for the thing that was actually there to find its way to the surface. He waited. It took 4 minutes. He counted, not obviously, just tracking it internally. Then Daniel's shoulders dropped about a half-inch. Just a half-inch. But it was the whole thing, really, that half-inch. She said it's over, Daniel said. His voice had changed. Still unsteady, but a different unsteady. The aggression had somewhere else to be now. Elias didn't say anything. She said it 3 weeks ago, and I don't know. Daniel looked at the broken piece in his hand as though surprised to find it there. I don't know why I'm here. You came to the wrong place, Elias said, which was not kind, but it was true, and he said it without any sharpness. Daniel looked at him. His eyes were red, not from crying, from a long evening of bad decisions and the ending of something, and probably a number of drinks that had seemed helpful at the time and were now very much not. Yeah, Daniel said. You should go home, Elias said. Do you have someone who can drive you? Daniel stood there. A friend, Elias said. Someone. A long pause. My brother, Daniel said. Call your brother. Daniel put the broken bird piece on the kitchen counter. He did it carefully, with a kind of delayed tenderness, as though he had only now noticed he had been holding it. He took out his phone. Elias stayed in the chair. Petra stayed across the room. Daniel called his brother in 3 sentences. I'm at a girl's place. I need a ride. I'll text the address, and then stood and looked at the floor. They waited in the kitchen, all 3 of them, for 11 minutes. Nobody talked much. At one point Petra made tea and set a cup in front of Elias without asking him, and he drank it. At one point Daniel sat down, in the chair across from Elias, and put his face in his hands. He didn't cry. He just held his own face for a while. Elias watched the kitchen table. The brother arrived. They heard the car outside. Daniel got up. He looked at Petra and started to say something and stopped. She looked at the window. He left through the front door. The kitchen was quiet. Petra sat down in the chair Daniel had left. She picked up her cup of tea. She did not say thank you. He did not need her to. After a while she said, How did you do that? He thought about the question. He thought about Marcus in the coffee shop and the too fast laugh and the fear underneath. He thought about rooms in Kabul and Baghdad and the wind-flattened eastern edges of places where men sat across from men with enough reason to kill each other and sometimes didn't. I just waited, he said. She looked at him over her cup. She seemed to decide this was enough of an answer. He went home through the gap in the broken fence. The yard was cold and still. The bumper was out front, same as always. He sat in his kitchen and did not feel proud of himself, which he thought was probably right. He felt something else, something that sat lower and quieter, the feeling of a person who has found a thing he had lost and cannot remember losing, and is not sure yet what to do with it now that it's back. He did not sleep for a while, but it was not a bad awake. It was the awake of a man who is thinking and does not mind. April came in slow and gray, and then, on the 9th day, turned warm without warning. Elias walked to the coffee shop without his heavy coat and felt the difference, the air lighter, the light different, something easing in the city the way a jaw unclenches after a long time. He had been writing, not easily, not fluently, but steadily, which was its own kind of gift. The document had 31 sentences now. Some of them were not good. Several were. One of them, a line about a particular afternoon in Kabul in 2004, made him read it twice before he moved on, and he was not a man who read his own words twice. Mara had sent the book. It arrived in a padded envelope with a yellow sticky note that said, "It gets better after chapter 3. The first 2 chapters are annoying. Don't give up." He had started it. She was right about chapters 1 and 2. He was currently in chapter 4, where it had, as promised, gotten better. He read 20 pages each night before sleep, and once, on a Sunday afternoon, had sat down intending to read 20 pages and looked up 90 minutes later in the quiet shock of a person who had been somewhere else entirely. He had sent her a text that said, "Chapter 7, you were right." She had replied, "I usually am." He'd stared at that for a moment and then smiled, which felt strange on his face, not painful, just unfamiliar, the way a room feels when you move the furniture and the light falls differently. He had also fixed the fence. It had taken a Saturday afternoon and some boards from the hardware store and the instructions from a video on the internet presented by a man in Arizona who kept calling him buddy in a way that was annoying but not catastrophically so. The fence was now straight on the left side. He stood back and looked at it, and it looked like a fence. This felt like a reasonable outcome. Petra had seen him doing it from her kitchen window and come outside and said, "You fixed it," as though this were remarkable. "It was broken," he said. "It's been broken since I moved in." "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a moment. She had been quieter since March. Not sad exactly, just a little flattened, the way people are after something passes through. She had left a plate of bakery pastries on his porch the morning after Daniel's visit. No note. He had eaten all of them standing at the counter. "How do you know how to do all that?" she said. "The fence, the thing with Daniel." He handed her the leftover screws from his pocket, which she did not need and didn't know what to do with. "I don't," he said. "I'm just old." She looked like she was going to ask a follow-up and then decided not to. She went back inside. He gathered his tools. On a Tuesday in late April, Mara called while he was in the parking lot of an auto repair shop. He had not planned to take the car in that morning. He had woken up, made his coffee, looked out the window at the driveway, and thought, as he had thought perhaps 300 times over the past 12 months, "I should get that fixed." And then he had gotten his keys. He didn't know what had made this morning different from the 300 mornings before it. He had thought about it on the drive over and not found an answer, and he was sitting in the parking lot, watching a man in gray coveralls disappear into the shop with his keys, when his phone rang. "Hey," Mara said. "Hey. What are you doing?" "Getting my bumper fixed," he said. A pause, the one Petra dented. "Yes. That was like a year ago. 11 months. Dad." The word carried an enormous amount of quiet amusement and a smaller amount of something else that he could not name precisely, but that he received with care. He looked at the shop. He could see his car through the window, up on the low platform, the man in the coveralls crouching near the bumper with a tool. "Tell me something," he said. And she did. She told him about her week, a difficult meeting she had handled well and felt good about, a friend who was having a complicated time, a run she had gone on along the river early morning, the light a certain way on the water. She described the light carefully, more carefully than people usually described light, and he listened to that. He was out there with her on the river for a moment, in the early light, on a run he would not have been able to manage at his age but could imagine. When she stopped, he said, "I started a run in October, 3 blocks. She laughed. It was a good laugh. His daughter had her mother's jaw in his laugh. The man in the coveralls appeared in the window, did something to the bumper with a tool, and disappeared again. They talked for 22 minutes. They covered no serious topics. They disagreed briefly, pleasantly, about whether a certain type of movie was worth watching. He said no. She said he hadn't seen it. He said he had seen enough of them to make an informed judgment. She said that was exactly what someone who had never seen it would say. He thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like, not the content of the conversation, the texture, two people talking about nothing and it being enough. When she hung up, he sat with his phone in his hand and looked at the shop. The man in the coveralls came out. He said the car was ready. He showed Elias the bumper smooth, repainted, no evidence of the dent at all. It looked, as far as Elias could tell, exactly like it had looked before Petra's car had caught it on a Tuesday 11 months ago. Elias looked at it. He waited for the satisfaction, the small click of completion, the closed-loop feeling of a thing put right. It didn't come, or not exactly. What came instead was something else entirely, something he had not expected and could not have explained to the man in the coveralls or to anyone else. He stood there looking at the smooth, repaired bumper, and he felt, of all things, a faint sadness. Not for the bumper. Not really. The bumper was fine. The bumper was better than fine. But somewhere in the 11 months of not fixing it, in the mornings of looking at it and writing asterisk bumper asterisk on a notepad, and then covering it with a grocery list, somewhere in all that, the dent had become something. He didn't know exactly what. A marker, maybe. A place where things had stood still while everything else, slowly and against his expectations, had not. He paid, he thanked the man. He drove to the coffee shop. Marcus was there. He was always there. He was on his phone, but the call ended quickly, and he set the phone face down on the table, which Elias had not seen him do before. He sat with his coffee and looked out the window. Elias walked past him to his table, and Marcus glanced up. He nodded. Not warmly, not with recognition or apology or any weight, just a nod. The small acknowledgement of two people who occupied the same space regularly. The nod you gave to someone you had never been friends with and never would be, but who was, in some minor way, part of the furniture of your days. Elias nodded back. He sat down, he opened the laptop, he looked at the document. 31 sentences. He looked at them all. He read them slowly, the way you walk through a room you've been away from, checking on things. Some of them were still good. One he changed. One he moved. He looked at what he had. He thought about Fallujah, the hotel room, the minibar, the sheets. He thought about Mara at 16 with her measuring look. He thought about Daniel's hand holding the broken bird piece with that unconscious tenderness. He thought about Marcus's face in those 6 seconds when the performance went offline, and he was just a man being tired in a chair. He thought about Petra saying, "I'm just old." He had said that. It was not the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. He put his fingers on the keyboard. He wrote a sentence. It was not about Fallujah. It was not about anger or the absence of anger or any of the things the document had been circling for months. It was about a morning in Kabul in 2004, a specific morning, the smell of the air and the quality of the light, and a dog that had been sleeping in the road and had stood up and walked away with complete unhurried dignity when traffic came, as though it had simply decided the nap was over. He did not know why that morning. He did not know why that dog. But the sentence was right. He knew it was right the way you know a door is properly closed, not because it looks closed, but because you can feel it somewhere in your hands. He wrote another sentence, and another. Outside, the spring light came through the window and fell across the table and sat there, warm and without agenda, the way light does when it has nowhere particular to be. Elias wrote. The coffee cooled beside him. He did not notice.